The Spirit and the Sprite, A Tale for the Fall by Douglas Dorda. This story begins, as so many others, in the night when the world's impossible things are easier to believe. On this particular night, a young wood sprite flitted from branch to branch in a great oak tree. The sprite had the look of a fairy about him, though his skin matched precisely the bark of the massive oak. This is why we rarely see wood sprites. However, if you closely look at a tree branch that moves when there is no wind, you may see them dancing there. Their eyes are like knots in the bark. The sprite heard approaching footsteps, so it hugged the tree and all but disappeared from sight. A human man and woman approached the base of the tree. Though he was graced with it, the sprite did not need magic to see there were no smiles on their faces. He watched the couple place a bouquet of flowers atop a grave marker he had never noticed was there. With heavy tears in their eyes, the couple softly spoke their remembrance in hopeful words. Slowly, a silver mist began to gather atop the grave marker. The more the man and woman spoke, the more the mist swirled and grew. It appeared as if it were no mere formulation of the weather. The sprite strained its eyes, and it saw the mist had in fact taken the shape of a young girl. He was astonished that the man and woman took no notice of the apparition. He was equally astonished to see them pass straight through her as they left the tree. With a great caution, he lowered himself branch by branch until he was in sight of the spirit girl. She lingered after her mourners. He couldn't help but notice how innocent and gentle the ghost appeared. He thought she looked like sunshine, and she reminded him of the smell of the forest after a rain. Though there were tears in her eyes, she made no sound as her face followed the sprite to the ground. The sprite longed to comfort the girl, though he knew not how. He approached her slowly, and he asked, "Now what might I do to put a smile on such a pretty young face?" Her misty form shaped a hand by which she pointed at the great oak that the sprite had descended from. Her tears remained, but there was a sternness in her face that the sprite took for intent. It was clear the ghost girl could not speak, so the sprite began to ask what she might want. "Would you like to go up in the tree?" he asked. She shook her head no. "Oh, would you like me to dance in the tree?" he playfully asked. She shook her head. The sprite patiently asked question after question of the spirit. Each question was met with a slow shake of the head and continued tears in her eyes. As happens each morning, the sun began to shine on the horizon. The sprite turned from the girl to watch the sky being torn from black to pink to blue. When he turned again, he discovered the spirit had gone. Dismayed, the sprite returned to the tree for a day's sleep. The fairy folk are most inactive during the day, and he gave thought to how a sprite could make a spirit smile. Months passed. Some nights, the human couple would visit the grave. On those nights, the spirit would arrive sure as the grass is green. Each night she appeared, the spirit attempted to remove the tears from her eyes. He ached to see her smile. She pointed, always pointed toward the tree. One night, the sprite asked the tree to shake its leaves for the girl. He and the tree were related, you see, so it was only a small favor and done with vigor. Though the girl's face remained stained with tears, a faint flicker of motion caught the corner of her mouth. It was something resembling a smirk. That night she pointed hard into the tree, as if saying the sprite had begun to understand. But what? The sprite had no idea. The nights grew colder. The sprite asked the tree to shake its leaves more and more vigorously to try and appease the girl. It seemed that the shaking leaves had lost their effect on her. Still, she pointed. When next the sprite and the spirit met, the sprite asked of the tree a favor so large that the tree blushed. How does a tree blush? Its leaves turned from green to yellow. The tree refused the sprite that night, but the spirit girl hung her mouth open at the sight of the changed leaves. Though her tears remained, the sprite knew he was headed in the right direction. The next night, the sprite asked the favor of the tree again. The tree blushed from yellow to red. Tears still in her eyes, the spirit seemed to gasp at the change. The next night, the spirit asked once more. The tree blushed from red to brown. The tears seemed less prevalent in the girl's eyes, and her misty hands clung tightly to one another. The next night, the tree agreed to do as the sprite asked. The sprite stood near the girl as each of the leaves of the great oak spilled from the tree into the air, and finally onto the ground. The girl's eyes were a beacon of bliss, as soundless laughter poured from her like a waterfall. The sprite let out a great woohoo and skipped around the girl in a dizzying display of glee. It was only then that he stopped to breathe, and he noticed the moon. The wide, full moon shone through the branches of his tree and wrapped him in a silver sheen he had never seen before. He looked to the girl to share a smile with her, only to see that her misty form had begun to melt into the silver beams of the moon. Like water flowing in a stream, the mist that comprised her flowed along the light of the moon and climbed high into the sky. When only her face was left visible, she blew a kiss to the sprite and gave him one last smile. A smile worth all of the magic in the world, the sprite thought. He watched as she vanished in bliss. He could swear he heard the sound of distant laughter, the true laughter of children at play. The sprite watched in earnest as the human couple approached the gravestone after months of absence. Though he was graced with it, he didn't need magic to see that they held smiles on their faces. It was as if a great levity breathed through their entire visit. After they had gone, the sprite turned to the tree and said, "Now, to make good on my promise." You see, the tree had made a condition for losing its leaves. In the spring, the sprite would be responsible for waking all of the budding leaves along its branches and teaching them how to grow. So the sprites continued to go about their work, setting things free in the fall and beginning things anew in the spring. The end.